Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, Season 07, Episode 09, where we plunge into Chapter 9 of Atkinson and Hilgard's Introduction to Psychology 15th Edition to explore a fundamental question. How do we truly think, and how does language shape every facet of our mental world? You know, it's incredible how our understanding of complex ideas evolves. Take the runner's high, for instance. Back in the 70s, everyone was, well, pretty convinced it was due to endorphins.
Right, these newly discovered morphine-like chemicals.
Exactly, and it became this widely accepted hypothesis. But then science dug deeper. They found that while endorphin levels do spike during exercise, these molecules don't actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
Which is kind of crucial.
It really is. So they couldn't be causing the mood boost. What's so fascinating about this story, for our purposes today, is how the entire process, from forming that initial concept of endorphins to generating and rigorously testing a hypothesis and ultimately debunking it, is utterly reliant on language.
We couldn't even think about it, let alone talk about it, without the mental architecture language provides.
So today, we're pulling back the curtain on the most complex machine we know, the human mind. This deep dive will show you that thinking isn't just about crunching numbers or playing chess. It's everything from meticulously planning your next vacation.
Or worrying about a relationship.
Exactly. It's the broad spectrum of mental activities we engage in, and, crucially, language is the primary vehicle through which we organize, process, and communicate these intricate thoughts. So we'll start by getting into the nuts and bolts of language itself, then explore the astonishing process of how we acquire it. From there, we'll uncover the very building blocks of thought or concepts before diving into the fascinating worlds of reasoning, visual imagery, and finally, the art of problem solving. It's going to be quite a journey into the mechanics of your own mind. So let's kick things off with language. It's truly universal. Every human society has one, and every child with normal development effortlessly picks up their native tongue. Yet, ironically, it poses immense challenges for even the most sophisticated AI. What makes human language so profoundly unique?
Well, the real insight here is that language operates on multiple interconnected levels. Whether you're trying to produce it, going from an abstract thought to a spoken sound, or comprehending it, moving from a sound to a meaning.
Okay.
So at the highest level, we organize ideas into sentence units like phrases and full sentences. Then we have words and morphemes, which are the smallest units that carry meaning. Think prefixes like un or suffixes like lookly.
Got it. The building blocks.
Exactly. And at the very lowest level are phonemes, the discrete speech sounds. The truly remarkable thing, and this is where human language really stands apart, is its productivity. A limited number of units at one level can combine into an almost infinite number at the next.
Wow.
Yeah. English, for example, uses only about 40 phonemes to create thousands of words, and those words can then form an endless variety of sentences. It's an incredible combinatorial power.
And when you dig into those phones, it's wild how our perception works, isn't it? English has around 40 distinct phonemes, but the precise sounds can vary wildly across languages.
Yeah.
Take the P sound. In pin, there's that little puff of air, but not in spin. We hardly notice the difference in English, but speakers of languages like Hindi perceive those as completely distinct sounds.
Right, it matters in their language.
Exactly. And conversely, Japanese speakers often struggle with the distinction between R and L because their language treats them as the same phoneme. It's like we unconsciously know the rules for combining these sounds, even for words that don't exist. How would you pluralize zook versus zug?
Well, zook would be zooks and zig would be zigzee.
Right. You automatically add an S to zook and a Z to zug without even thinking about it, because your brain already understands the subtle rules about which sounds can follow others in English.
Moving up a level, we get to morphemes, the smallest units that truly carry meaning. Most morphemes are full words themselves, but some are those prefixes or suffixes we mentioned, like anon or loyally. And it's important to differentiate between content words, which carry the main meaning like house or run, and grammatical morphemes, which mainly help make sentences grammatical. Things like a, the, or the ing and ed endings.
The glue words.
Sort of, yeah. And what's quite telling is how brain damage, particularly in cases of Broca's aphasia, can selectively impair the use of these grammatical morphemes while leaving the core content words relatively intact. It points to different underlying mechanisms.
And when it comes to the meaning of words, there's often more going on in our heads than we realize. Take club. In context, it could mean a social organization or, a stick.
Sure.
If someone says he wanted to join the club, you instantly understand which meaning applies. But here's where it gets truly intriguing. Even when the context makes the meaning crystal clear, there's evidence that your brain actually briefly activates both interpretations unconsciously.
Both meanings at the same time.
Briefly, yes. Studies show that if you hear club in that sentence, and are then immediately shown a word related to either meaning like group or struck, you'll read it faster. It's like your mind briefly explores all possibilities before settling on the contextually appropriate one. Let's talk about how we structure sentences into propositions. Think of a proposition as the core idea atom within a sentence, that single undeniable thought or claim the sentence is built to deliver.
Okay, the basic unit of meaning.
Exactly. We unconsciously break sentences into noun phrases, which often align with the subject of a thought, and verb phrases, which correspond to what that subject is doing. So in Serious Scholars Read Books, serious scholars isn't just a phrase. It contains the proposition, scholars are serious.
And scholars read books.
Right. This syntactic analysis is how our brains effortlessly figure out who did what to whom. Consider, the green bird ate a red snake. You instantly know the bird, not the snake, did the eating and which creature was which color. It all happens so automatically.
Until it doesn't.
Right. And sometimes this unconscious process can trip us up, like garden path sentences. The horse raced past the barn, fell. Most people stumble because their brain initially assumes raced past the barn is the main verb, leaving fell hanging.
Which makes no sense then. It really highlights just how ingrained and automatic this syntactic analysis is. We just do it. And what's absolutely crucial for comprehension is the powerful effect of context. Our background knowledge fills in so many gaps. Remember that famously dense paragraph about a procedure?
Oh yeah, the one that made no sense.
Until you were told it was about washing clothes. Suddenly, abstract terms like different groups make perfect sense as clothing of different colors.
Right, context is everything.
It really is. And beyond general knowledge, understanding a speaker's intention is also vital. If someone asks, could you pass the potatoes at dinner?
You don't question their ability, you pass the potato.
Exactly. You understand they want you to pass them. But if your arm were in a sling, the exact same words might genuinely be a question about your physical capability. It's all about the context you're in.
That makes sense.
And remarkably, our language production adapts to this too. If someone in Detroit asked, where is the Empire State Building? You'd say, in New York. But if you were already in Manhattan, you'd say, on 34th Street, because you assume they need a more precise location based on the context.
So what's happening in our brains during all this linguistic acrobatics?
Yeah.
Neuroscientists have identified two key areas, predominantly in the left hemisphere of the cortex, that are indispensable for language. Broca's area?
In the frontal lobes.
Right. And Wernicke's area.
Found in the temporal region. Damage to either, or the connections between them, leads to distinct language breakdowns we call aphasias.
Yeah, and the differences between these aphasias are quite stark and reveal a lot about how language is processed. Broca's aphasia, from damage to Broca's area, results in very disfluent, almost telegraphic speech.
Like short, choppy sentences. Exactly. A patient might say something like, arm no good. Speech. Can't say. Talk, you see. Their sentences are short, often missing those small grammatical words, and their syntax is severely disrupted. They struggle, for example, to understand complex sentences like, the lion that the tiger is chasing is fat, because they can't rely on the grammatical structure to figure out who is doing what.
Wow.
In sharp contrast, Wernicke's aphasia, caused by damage to Wernicke's area, leads to surprisingly fluent speech that, however, is largely devoid of content. Patients might speak in long sentences using made-up words or struggling to find the right nouns, indicating a disruption at the level of words and their associated concepts.
Fluent, but meaningless, almost.
Pretty much. There's even conduction aphasia, where someone can understand and produce speech but can't repeat a spoken sentence, suggesting a problem with the neural connections linking these areas. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, while we often localize these functions to specific areas, neurosurgery has revealed surprising individual variability in the precise brain locations for language, highlighting the brain's incredible flexibility.
Okay, so we've broken down how language works. But how do children achieve this incredible linguistic mastery in just a few short years? It's truly one of the most profound puzzles in human psychology.
It really is. And the journey begins incredibly early. Consider phone perception. Infants, initially, can discriminate all phonemes from any language on Earth.
All of them. Wow.
Yep. But by the time they're just 1 year old, they lose the ability to distinguish between sounds that aren't relevant to their native language. For instance, a 6-month-old Japanese child can easily distinguish the ill from R sounds, a distinction not present in Japanese, but by age 1, they'll lose that ability. It's as if their brain is pruning away unused pathways.
So they specialize.
Exactly. While phoneme perception hones in early, truly mastering how to combine these phonemes into words takes several more years.
And then, around age 1, the verbal explosion begins with early word and concept acquisition. Children start mapping familiar concepts like data or dog onto specific words. You often see overextension at this stage, right?
Mm-hmm. Like a 2-year-old calling all four-legged animals doggy, even though they can correctly pick out their actual pet from pictures.
Right. And this overextension typically disappears as their vocabulary absolutely explodes from about 25 words at 1.5 years old to an astonishing 15,000 words by age 6.
Which is something like 10 new words a day. It's incredible.
It really is.
And the progression of sentence development is equally remarkable. Between 1.5 and 2.5 years, children move from single words to what we call telegraphic speech, 2-word utterances like daddy hat or towel bed.
Like sending a telegram, just the key words.
Precisely. These sentences often lack grammatical words and suffixes, but they still convey basic meaning. From there, they rapidly begin forming more complex sentences, gradually incorporating those grammatical morphemes, like saying, Daddy is wearing a hat. What's truly consistent is that this entire developmental sequence is observed across virtually all cultures, regardless of the specific language being learned.
But wait, if it's so consistent, why aren't simple imitation and conditioning enough to explain it? I mean, kids say things they've definitely never heard an adult say.
Absolutely. Think about it. Children constantly produce novel sentences they've never heard before, like all gone milk. And even when they try to imitate longer sentences, they often default back to their simpler telegraphic style.
And parents don't usually correct every little grammatical mistake, do they? They're more focused on whether they understand the kid.
Exactly. There's that classic example where a child keeps saying, nobody don't like me, and the mother tries to correct them, saying, no, say nobody likes me, but the child just responds, oh, nobody don't like me. They just can't seem to replicate the grammatically correct version initially. Clearly, there's something more profound happening than just mimicking or being rewarded.
So what is it then?
Well, it's much more akin to a hypothesis testing model. Children unconsciously form rules. For example, add aid for past tense, and then they overgeneralize them, producing words like good or braked, even though they've never heard those forms.
Ah, right. I've heard kids do that.
Eventually, they learn the exceptions. The truly fascinating part is that these hypotheses aren't random. Children seem guided by what we call operating principles, such as pay attention to the ends of words or look for prefixes and suffixes that signal a change in meaning. These underlying principles appear to be universal across the many diverse languages that have been studied.
This brings us to a fascinating ongoing debate. Is language learning strictly about rules? Or are associations also key? Some researchers suggest that overextensions, for example, might simply be due to weaker memory for irregular forms.
Or maybe learning associations, like how verbs ending in an ox sound, such as talk or walk, are likely to take D for the past tense.
But there has to be more to it, right? Because break and break sound identical, but their past tenses are broke and braked, respectively. That points to deeper grammatical rules beyond just sound.
Exactly. And compellingly, brain studies with aphasics seem to support this. Broca's aphasics, who struggle with grammar, had more trouble with regular verbs, which are rule-based, while anomic aphasics, who have memory retrieval problems, struggle more with irregular verbs, which rely on memory. It really seems to be a complex blend of innate rules, learned associations, and memory.
So you mentioned innate rules. What role do innate factors truly play in this amazing process?
There's strong evidence pointing to significant inborn knowledge. For one, the consistent stages of language development we see across diverse cultures. From single words at age 1 to near adult-like speech by age 4 strongly suggests a common innate timetable.
Like a biological program unfolding.
Kind of, yeah. And even more compelling is the phenomenon of home sign. Deaf children born to hearing parents who don't teach them formal sign language spontaneously create their own structured language systems of gestures.
Yeah, they make up their own language.
Yes, complete with their own morphemes and syntax. And they follow the same developmental stages as hearing children. This really highlights the richness of our innate linguistic blueprint, almost a built-in language learning device.
And this innate component also implies the existence of critical periods in language acquisition, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That first year of life is absolutely crucial for a child to home in on the phones of their native language. That's why acquiring the sound system of a second language later in life is so incredibly difficult, often leading to persistent accents that are almost impossible to unlearn.
The window closes, in a way.
It seems so, at least for the sound system. And the critical period isn't just for sounds, it applies powerfully to syntax, too. The famous case of Jeannie, a girl subjected to extreme isolation and neglect, showed that despite high intelligence, she could never fully master grammar after her discovery at age 11.
So sad. She could learn words, but not the rules.
Essentially, yes. The window for acquiring complex syntax had seemingly closed. Studies of American Sign Language learners further confirm this. Those exposed to ASL from birth achieved far greater syntactic mastery than those who learned it later in childhood or after age 12, even decades later.
Wow, so early exposure is key.
It seems to be, especially for syntax. Similarly, for second language learners, earlier exposure consistently leads to greater proficiency, although social integration and motivation also play a significant role, of course.
So all this begs the question, can other species truly learn human language? Our language has unique properties, like its incredible productivity combining limited sounds into unlimited words and sentences.
And the duality of structure, meaning sounds don't have meaning on their own, but words do, and complex word order changing meaning.
Right. Jonah ate the whale versus the whale ate Jonah. Very different. These properties fundamentally distinguish human language from typical animal communication.
Indeed. And the ape language studies are famous. Washu learning sign language, Sarah using plastic symbols, Coco acquiring hundreds of signs.
They definitely learned vocabulary.
Yes, there's little doubt these apes gained a human-like vocabulary. However, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the crucial debate is whether they demonstrated true syntactic ability, the systematic combination and reordering of signs in novel, rule-governed ways, as humans do with words.
Was it just imitation?
That's part of the debate. Early reports of ape sentences often turned out to be highly repetitive, like you, me, banana you, or potentially just imitations of their trainers, which isn't how human children naturally acquire language.
So not really generating new meanings with grammar?
Mostly not, it seems. While a bonobo named Kanzi did show some limited syntactic ability akin to a 2-year-old, by varying word order, it took him substantially longer to reach that point. As Noam Chomsky famously quipped, if an animal had a capacity as biologically advantageous as language but somehow hadn't used it until now, it would be an evolutionary miracle.
A powerful point. All right, let's pivot from the structure of language to the architecture of thought itself. We've touched on how thought can operate in different modes. Propositional thought, which is like those inner sentences we hear in our minds.
Our internal monologue.
Yeah, and imaginal thought, which corresponds to the visual images we see in our minds. So let's unpack this. What exactly are concepts, and why are they so fundamental to how we think and make sense of the world?
Well, a concept is essentially the set of properties we associate with a particular class of objects or ideas. Your concept of a cat, for instance, includes properties like having 4 legs, whiskers, purring, maybe being aloof.
Okay.
Sometimes, concepts serve 2 incredibly important functions. First, cognitive economy. The world is overwhelmingly complex. If we treated every single object as unique, our brains would be swamped. Concepts allow us to group objects, seeing many different animals as instances of cat, which vastly reduces the mental load.
Prevents information overload.
Exactly. Second, concepts provide predictive power. Once we categorize something as an apple based on its visible properties, we can immediately infer unperceived properties, like it having seeds inside or being edible. Concepts allow us to go beyond what we directly perceive.
And within each concept, there's a fascinating distinction between its prototype and its core. Can you explain that?
Sure. The prototype describes the properties of the best or most typical examples, what usually comes to mind first. For grandmother, your prototype might be a kind woman in her 60s with gray hair who bakes cookies.
The stereotypical grandma.
Right. But the core comprises the essential defining properties. A grandmother at her core is simply a female parent of a parent. The prototype is what's most salient and quickly accessible, but the core is the non-negotiable definition for category membership.
So you can have a 40-year-old grandmother who doesn't bake.
Yeah,
She still fits the core definition.
precisely. And that distinction becomes particularly clear when we compare well-defined concepts, like grandmother, where the core definition is easily applied, with fuzzy concepts, like bird.
Fuzzy.
Yeah, because while we might know the core involves certain genetic or biological properties, those aren't immediately observable. So for fuzzy concepts, we rely much more on their similarity to the prototype. A robin is a very typical bird because it flies and chirps.
Fits the prototype perfectly.
Right. Unlike an ostrich, the more prototype properties an instance has, the more typical it's considered, and the faster and more accurately we categorize it. A robin gets an immediate yes as a bird, while a penguin or an ostrich might take a bit longer to classify.
What's truly fascinating here is the surprising universality of prototype formation. You might think prototypes are all cultural, but that's not always the case.
Not entirely, no. While some concepts are clearly culturally influenced, for natural concepts like red, prototypes are remarkably consistent across cultures. Even among cultures whose language doesn't have a specific word for red, people still pick the same best examples of red hues that we would.
Like the Dane tribe study.
Exactly. They only have words for black and white, but they perceive color variations similarly, recognizing typical red colors better than less typical ones. And even animal concepts, comparing Maya Itza people and U.S. students, show strikingly similar prototypes based on easily observable features.
So some prototypes might be based on fundamental perception.
It seems likely. And these concepts aren't just isolated, they're organized into meaningful hierarchies. For example, a golden delicious apple is part of the broader concept apple, which in turn is a subset of fruit.
Levels of specificity.
Right. And in any such hierarchy, one level is considered the basic level, our preferred level of classification. For that example, apple is the basic level. We're more likely to call a golden delicious apple simply an apple first.
Why is that?
Because basic level concepts offer the most distinctive and informative properties. They're learned first by children, used more frequently, and often have shorter names. It's the most efficient way to initially carve up the world.
So how do we actually go about categorizing new objects we encounter? Is it always about comparing to a prototype?
Not always. For well-defined concepts like grandmother, we might use rule-based categorization simply applying the core definition. But for those fuzzy concepts like bird or furniture, we rely more on similarity-based categorization, comparing a new object to a concept's prototype or to specific stored exemplars.
Exemplars, what are those?
Actual examples we've encountered in the past. So instead of an abstract prototype of dog, you might compare a new dog to specific dogs you already know. Ah, okay. This raises an important question. How do we actually acquire all these concepts? Are we born with them?
Some basic ones, like perhaps time and space, might be innate, but most others are learned. The cores of concepts are often explicitly taught, like being told a robber is someone who takes possessions without permission.
School learning definitions.
Right. Prototypes, however, are typically learned through experience associating robbers with being sneaky or dangerous based on stories or movies. Interestingly, children initially rely heavily on prototypes.
Like in the robber example.
Exactly. Younger kids might think a smelly old man with a gun is more of a robber than a friendly woman who steals a toilet, simply because the man fits the prototype better. It's only around age 10 that they shift to understanding the core legal definition.
And what other ways do we learn concepts through experience?
Well, there's the exemplar strategy we mentioned, where you simply store specific instances like learning furniture by remembering individual tables, chairs, and couches you've seen. Later, you classify new items by how similar they are to these stored exemplars, building a mental library of examples.
Exactly. Another way is hypothesis testing, where you inspect known instances, look for common properties, and then test your hypothesis on new objects, refining it if necessary, like figuring out what makes something a game.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. The neural basis of concepts and categorization. Does the brain treat all concepts the same way?
It seems not. Research suggests that different brain regions might store concepts of animals versus artifacts, or maybe concepts based on perceptual features versus functional features.
So damage to one area might affect recognizing animals, but not tools.
Precisely. We see patients like that. And there's compelling evidence that prototype-based categorization uses different brain regions than exemplar-based categorization. Amnesiacs, for instance, who can't form new long-term memories or learn new exemplars, can still learn prototype-based categories from dot patterns.
But not categories based on specific examples, like paintings.
Right. Furthermore, rule-based categorization, like classifying imaginary animals based on complex logical features, activates frontal regions of the brain, distinct from the visual cortex activity seen in similarity-based categorization. So the clear takeaway here is that these findings provide strong biological support for the psychological distinctions we make in how we think and categorize the world.
All right, let's now transition to reasoning, which is how we organize our thoughts into arguments, with premises leading us to a conclusion.
And we can start with deductive reasoning, where the goal is deductive validity. That means the conclusion must be true if the premises are true.
The classic logic problems. If A, then BA is true.
Therefore, B is true. Exactly. If it's raining, I'll take an umbrella. It's raining, therefore I'll take an umbrella. For simple arguments like this, people often unconsciously use logical rules. However, when arguments become more complex or when they conflict with our existing beliefs, we can fall prey to belief bias.
Belief bias.
Yeah, where we accept a logically invalid conclusion simply because it seems plausible. For instance, a huge majority of people will accept the conclusion, therefore some addictive things are cigarettes, from the premises, no addictive things are inexpensive, and some cigarettes are inexpensive, even though it doesn't logically follow.
Because it sounds reasonable that some cigarettes are addictive.
Precisely. Our preconceived notions override pure logic.
And building on that, consider the powerful effects of content on deductive reasoning with the famous Wasson selection task. Can you remind us of that?
Sure. In one version, you have cards with letters and numbers, and you test the rule. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other side. Most people correctly pick the E to flip, but often miss the 7, which could disprove the rule.
Right, they look for confirmation, not disconfirmation.
Exactly. Yet if you reframe the same logical problem to, if a person is drinking beer, he or she must be over 19, using cards with age and drink, performance improves dramatically. Most people correctly pick beer and 16.
Why the big difference? It's the same logic.
It is, but our reasoning isn't purely abstract. It's often guided by pragmatic rules or mental models. The drinking age scenario immediately triggers a permission rule, a common everyday rule that says if a certain action is taken, a precondition must be met.
Like you need permission, being over 19, to perform the action, drink beer.
Right, and this rule intuitively tells us to look for violations. Someone drinking beer who is not over 19. The abstract letter number problem doesn't trigger such a practical rule, so we don't naturally look for disconfirming evidence. We create concrete mental models or apply these practical rules based on the problem's content.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Now, let's turn to inductive reasoning, where our conclusions are probable, not absolutely certain, like saying Mitch is probably an accountant based on his personality.
Exactly. It's about likelihoods. This type of reasoning involves probability rules, like the base rate rule, how common something is generally, and the conjunction rule, that two things happening together can't be more probable than one of them happening alone.
Seems straightforward enough.
You'd think so. But what's truly fascinating here is how often people violate these fundamental probability rules in everyday reasoning, preferring instead to rely on heuristics.
Mental shortcuts.
Precisely. Take base rate violations. In one study, participants were told a group was 70% lawyers and 30% engineers. When given a neutral personality description, they often ignored the base rate, judging the person as equally likely to be an engineer or a lawyer.
Even though lawyer was much more likely overall.
Right. Or the conjunction rule violation with Linda the bank teller and feminist. Given a description suggesting Linda cares about social justice, most people judge Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement as more probable than simply Linda is a bank teller.
Which is logically impossible.
It is, but it feels right because the combined description seems more representative of Linda based on the initial information.
So these violations often stem from the similarity heuristic judging probability based on how similar something is to a prototype or stereotype.
Exactly. Linda seems more like a feminist bank teller prototype. This also leads to some interesting fallacies. People might judge all robins have property X, therefore all sparrows have property X as stronger than, therefore all ostriches have property X, just because robins and sparrows are more similar.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense.
But then we also judge all robins have property X, therefore all birds have property X as stronger than, therefore all ostriches have property X, even though ostriches are birds. Our similarity-based intuitions can really lead us astray from pure logic sometimes.
Are there other common
Oh,
heuristics?
yes. There's the causality heuristic, where we estimate probability based on the strength of perceived causal connections, judging an earthquake causing a massive flood as more probable than just a massive flood, again violating the conjunction rule because it tells a better story.
We like causal stories.
We do. Then there's the availability heuristic, where we estimate frequency based on how easily we can recall examples. People often incorrectly estimate that more words start with R than have R in the third position, simply because it's easier to think of words starting with R.
So the takeaway here is that our reliance on these mental shortcuts, while often efficient, can lead us to ignore basic rational rules. There's also the representativeness heuristic.
Right, extrapolating wildly from a single case, often seen in gamblers thinking they're on a hot streak.
And the pervasive confirmation bias, seeking out information that confirms what we already believe.
Exactly. While heuristics can lead to errors, it's important to acknowledge they are often incredibly useful shortcuts in our busy, information-rich lives. We wouldn't function well without them.
That's a fair point. And what about the neural basis of reasoning? Does the brain handle deduction and induction differently?
It seems so. Brain imaging studies have provided compelling evidence for distinct brain activations. Deductive reasoning often activates regions in the right hemisphere, potentially reflecting the use of spatial representations or mental models.
Interesting.
In contrast, inductive reasoning often lights up areas in the left hemisphere, particularly in the frontal cortex, which is associated with estimation and probability assessments. This supports the idea that we have different neural machinery dedicated to these two distinct types of reasoning.
Now let's shift gears to imaginal thought, that incredible ability to think in visual images, our mind's eye. How does this fascinating mode of thought actually work?
We use it constantly. Try to recall the precise shape of a German shepherd's ears right now, or mentally rotate an uppercase N by 90 degrees in your head, or count the windows in your living room just from memory.
Okay, yeah, I can picture the room. Counting.
Most people report forming a visual image and then looking at it or scanning it, much like they would a real object. This suggests that mental imagery involves the same kind of analogical representations and mental processes as actual perception. It preserves genuine visual detail.
So let's unpack this. What do we know about these imaginal operations? You mentioned rotation.
Right. The classic mental rotation experiment is a fantastic illustration. Participants were shown a letter R, either normal or backward, rotated to various degrees. The further the letter was rotated, the longer it took them to decide if it was normal or backward.
Like they were physically turning it in their head.
Exactly. It strongly suggests they were literally mentally rotating the image in their mind, just like they would manipulate a physical object.
What about scanning?
Similarly, scanning mental images behaves remarkably like scanning real objects. In one clever experiment, participants memorized a fictional island map, then were asked to mentally scan between two specific points on it. The time it took them to arrive at the destination increased linearly with the imagined distance between the points.
Just like scanning a real map.
Precisely. And then there's the grain size limitation. Just like a TV screen has a resolution limit, our mental images do too. Larger imaged objects or properties are faster to inspect for details than smaller ones, reinforcing the idea that imagery closely mimics perception, imperfections, and all.
And here's where it gets really intriguing. The powerful evidence for the neural basis of imagery. What does brain science tell us?
Well, we've learned so much from studying brain-damaged patients. For example, individuals with visual neglect who ignore one side of their actual visual field due to brain injury also show the same neglect in their mental images.
They ignore one side of their mental picture.
Yes. A patient asked to imagine Milan Square from one perspective reported only objects on the right side of their mental image. When asked to imagine it from the opposite perspective, they neglected the objects that were now on the left side of their mental image, even though they had just reported them.
Wow, that's impelling.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, brain scanning studies in normal individuals show activation in the visual cortex during imagery tasks, such as visualizing a walk, mirroring the exact pattern seen during actual perception. This strongly suggests that imagery and perception share the same underlying neural mechanisms. Your mind's eye is literally using parts of your actual visual system.
Amazing. To conclude our exploration of thought, let's turn to problem solving. That universal process of striving for a goal when the path forward isn't immediately obvious. It always involves an initial state where you are and a goal state where you want to be.
And often breaking the problem down into smaller, manageable sub-goals.
Right. What are some common strategies we use?
Well, we use various problem-solving strategies, sometimes called weak methods because they're general rather than problem-specific. There's the simple difference reduction method, where you just try to reduce the gap between your current state and the goal, step by step.
Like getting warmer in a game of hot or cold.
Kind of, yeah. Or finding the sequence for a combination lock one number at a time. A more sophisticated approach is means-ends analysis, where you identify the most important difference, find a procedure to eliminate it, even if it means temporarily moving away from the goal to overcome an obstacle.
Like needing to fix your car to get to your destination.
Exactly. You create a sub-goal, fix car, to achieve the main goal, reach destination, and then there's working backward from the goal, which is particularly useful for things like geometry proofs, where you know the answer you need to prove.
And the way we solve problems hinges crucially on representing the problem in our minds, doesn't it? Sometimes words work, sometimes pictures.
Absolutely. Some problems are far easier to crack with a propositional representation, like a logical sequence of statements, while others practically demand a visual representation or image. Take the classic monk on the mountain problem.
Oh, I remember this one. The monk climbing up one day, down the next. Is there a spot he hits at the same time both days?
Right. Trying to solve that with equations is tough, but if you visualize one monk going up and another coming down simultaneously on the same path, they must meet somewhere. The visual representation makes the solution obvious.
That's a great example.
But what's truly fascinating here is how our mental representation can actually become an obstacle. Functional fixedness is a classic example.
The candle problem.
Exactly. Most people struggle to see a box of tacks as anything other than a container, failing to realize it can be used as a platform to mount the candle on the wall. They're fixed on the box's usual function.
So how do we overcome that?
The key is often restructuring the problem or finding an analogy. The equally famous radiation problem, destroying a tumor without harming healthy tissue, was often solved when people heard an analogy about small groups of soldiers storming a fortress from multiple directions.
So using multiple low-dose radiation beams converging on the tumor.
Precisely. It powerfully demonstrates how reframing a problem or drawing parallels can unlock solutions.
So the core insight here seems to be that there's a clear contrast between experts and novices in problem solving. It's not just about knowing more stuff, is it?
Not at all. Experts have far more specific and organized representations in memory. They focus on underlying principles rather than just superficial features. They plan extensively before acting, and crucially, they tend to reason forward, from the givens of a problem directly towards a solution.
Unlike novices who might work backward or get stuck on surface details, like chess masters seeing patterns, maybe.
Exactly. Chess masters, expert physicians. They reason from the current state towards the goal, whereas novices often flail around a bit more, working backward from possible solutions.
And as we gain expertise, things become automatic, right?
Yes, automaticity is huge. Many tasks, once learned, occur effortlessly without conscious control, like driving a car or reading. The Stroop effect vividly demonstrates this.
Where you see the word BLOE printed in red ink.
Right. You automatically read blue, which interferes with your ability to quickly name the ink color red. This shows how reading becomes an automatic process we perform without conscious effort, even when we don't want to. This also ties into the dual process theory of reasoning, distinguishing fast, intuitive, automatic processes from slower, deliberate, rule-based ones.
And there's even research suggesting our unconscious mind is pretty good at problem solving, too.
Yes, some cutting-edge research on unconscious thought for complex decisions suggests exactly that. Studies where participants chose between complex options like apartments or cars found that those who were distracted for a few minutes before deciding, allowing for unconscious processing, often made better choices and were more satisfied later compared to those who consciously deliberated intensely.
So stepping away from a problem might actually help.
For complex decisions with many factors, it might. It implies that unconscious thought is an active, goal-dependent process that allows for a better weighing of many factors, perhaps beyond the limitations of our conscious working memory.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets truly interesting, bringing language back in. There's a big seeing both sides debate. Do people who speak different languages think differently? This brings us to the Horphian hypothesis.
Right. The idea that the language you speak influences or maybe even determines how you perceive and think about the world.
What's the evidence for this?
Well, there are some compelling arguments. Consider the Pirahan, an Amazonian tribe whose language reportedly lacks specific number words. Studies suggest they genuinely struggle with elementary number concepts that require exact quantity.
So language limits thought.
It might in some domains. Or think about color. English speakers readily distinguish between blue and green, while Tarahumara speakers, whose language has a single GRU term for both, perceive these colors less distinctly in certain tasks. Language also affects auditory perception early on, making us less sensitive to sound distinctions not used in our language.
We talked about that with infants losing phone discrimination.
Exactly. Even abstract domains like time are influenced. Chinese speakers often use a vertical spatial metaphor for time, up for earlier, down for later, and they respond faster to time questions after seeing a vertical prime, unlike English speakers who use ahead and behind. And the Celtal Mayan language, using absolute spatial terms like north and south instead of left and right, impacts how its speakers remember and reason spatially.
Those are pretty strong examples, but there are counter-arguments too, right? The strong Horphian view isn't fully accepted.
No, the strong view that language determines thought is likely an overstatement. For instance, the Munduruku people can recognize complex geometric shapes even without rich geometric terms. And the Pirahan can still perform basic numerical estimations despite lacking number words.
So thought isn't completely bound by language.
It seems not. There are also likely universal perceptual constraints on language itself. Basic colors, taste suggesting shared human cognitive biases that shape language, not just the other way around. Plus, some studies suggesting cognitive differences might be due to experimental ambiguities, or cognitive mechanisms might show flexibility despite linguistic differences. Celtal speakers, for example, can still use left-right reasoning implicitly when needed.
So where does that leave us? Does language shape thought or not?
It's nuanced. The current thinking leans towards language acting more as an additional route for encoding experience. It's a powerful tool for organizing, tracking, and communicating information, a kind of cognitive scaffolding, but it doesn't necessarily permanently reshape our fundamental perception or core cognitive processing in the way Worf originally suggested. The interplay is complex. Language influences thought, and thought influences language.
What a deep dive. We've journeyed from the precise sounds of language all the way to the vast landscapes of the mind, uncovering how your inner world is structured and how you navigate it, from the unconscious rules of grammar to the surprising power of our mental images. Wow. It's clear that thinking is a truly multifaceted and often counterintuitive process, operating in ways we're only just beginning to fully grasp.
It really is. And that leads to a fascinating thought, perhaps for you listening. Given this incredible interplay between language and thought, and how much of our mental life operates automatically or unconsciously, how might gaining this knowledge change the way you approach learning a new skill, solving a complex problem, or even just listening to a conversation in your daily life?
Exactly. Something to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating exploration. Keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, the deepest insights are often just a thought away.